AskReddit by massive amounts of piss. What is a very bad statistic people should know? Working out in any capacity decreases your likelihood of death from cardiovascular disease, dementia, and cancer by 14%, on average. This compounds over time. Really insane when you think about how important physical activity is to human function. What qualifies as any capacity? Like, what's the most mundane thing a person could do that would count? 70% of former foster care youth are arrested at least once before age 26. This one got me. I was friends with a foster kid when we were 10 and she was always acting up at school. She lived in a family with 16 other kids, not sure how that was legal, and was adamant that the lady running the house hated kids. She also mentioned many sex positions. Again, we were 10. She shut everyone out for a bit before leaving the school with her new placement, and I've always wondered what happened to her, only know her first name. If you go in cardiac arrest outside the hospital, even with first responders nearby, your chances of getting out of the hospital alive is less than 10%. My dad went into cardiac arrest in his driveway shoveling snow. Garbage man saw him drop and began chest compressions immediately. Ambulance brought him back to life with ED. No brain damage or anything. He stabilized at the hospital and was back to normal within the year. Was one of the lucky ones. Edit, just to add a bit with his cardiac arrest, there was no chest pain or dizziness, he says. 1 second he was shoveling, next second he was in the hospital in pain, just went dark is what he can recall. The garbage man said he just saw him drop like a stone. Despite all the fear-mongering about serial killers and unknown attackers coming out of the dark, if you were to become a murder victim, it is very likely that you knew the murderer. My ex-GF was obsessed and terrified of serial killers. Her mom's friend was killed by a serial killer during college and it mentally destroyed her mother, and she passed that package of mental issues down to her daughter. Her mom later confessed that she wasn't sure who killed her friend. And when I looked up the name of the girl, it was clearly done by her boyfriend at the time, and he was arrested and was still sitting in jail 30 years later. Is something people who are bad with statistics should know acceptable too? Percent increase or decrease means nothing without the baseline. They don't add up either. A 10% increase of a 4% chance to get cancer means it's now a 4.4% chance to get that cancer, not 14. An X-fold increase of something is useless without the baseline. 2-3 times more likely to get a cancer that usually occurs in 4% of the population gets you to 12%, but a 3x increase of something that happens 0.4% of the time is 1.2%, not that spectacular an effect. For the individual neither matters. If you get it, it sucks. Thank you. I cannot stand when you will hear people bring up stats, usually for some political nonsense, but the numbers themselves are inflated to make some arbitrary point. 1 in 4 known pregnancies end in loss. That's 25%, folks. This should be talked about more. We had no idea how common it was until we lost one. Women feel like it's their fault, and it's generally not. Miscarriage is way more common than I was led to believe. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation has 80% unemployment, 50% living below the poverty line, a life expectancy of 50 years, shortest in the Western Hemisphere, infant mortality rate 5 times the national average, suicide rate 4 times the national average, 85% of families are affected by alcoholism, 25% of newborns are diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, and school dropout rate is 70%. This is in the middle of the United States. I remember this place. It was on an episode of Gangland back in the day. Approximately 42% of Americans are deficient in vitamin D according to Nick. Sick all the time? Vitamin D boosts immunity. Hair falling out? Vitamin D helps stimulate new hair follicles. Are you a woman nearing menopause? Your bones need calcium and your body absorbs it poorly if you're deficient in vitamin D. Basically, we need the D. Instructions unclear. Now I am walking funny. Depressed people are much more accurate when it comes to self-assessment. Which is depressing. Oh yeah. My therapist always comments on how self-aware I am. She is trying to get me to love myself, to look at myself as another person and see my struggles and want to help that person. It's very difficult. Imagine being forced to make friends with someone you've hated your entire life. 27,000 people died every day during WWII on average. Damn, that's sad. What's the daily death rate in general? If a partner strangles you, the odds they will murder you within the next year increases by 750%. Also, the leading cause of death for pregnant women is homicide. Edit to @ Google is free if the statistics interest you. The main takeaway is, if someone strangles you, they don't give a fuck if you breathe. Consider that and leave when possible. And 20% of postpartum deaths, up to 12 months, are suicide. Every 10 cm increase, about 4 inches, in height was found to be associated with a 14% increased risk of developing colorectal cancer. The average height in the US for men is 5 feet, 9 inches, and for women it is 5 feet, 4 inches. This means men who are 6 feet, 1 inch and women who are 5 feet, 8 inches, 4 inches / 10 centimeters above the average US height, or taller are at a 14% increased risk of colorectal cancer and a 6% increased risk of adenomas. Why is this? Simply because of a larger colon, so more opportunity? Or because of a greater volume of food? The divorce rate in the US is not 50%. Divorce has been declining for decades, and for first-time marriages the likelihood of divorce is way lower than second marriages or beyond, third, fourth, etc. Deleted. An estimated 9 million plus tons of plastic waste end up in the ocean each year. Day traders tend to lose money, 90% of them do, and I'm undervaluing that number. Proceed with utmost caution when experimenting with the stock market. Day trading is borderline gambling and I will die on this hill. I go to GA meetings. There's at least a handful of people at every meeting who were or are addicted to day trading and short selling. Ask any one of them and they'll tell you it's the same feeling as gambling. The bottom 15% of IQ is considered too troublesome to be trained for any use by the military. https://en.wikipedia.org/project_100,000. The richest 1% of the world's population own more than twice as much wealth as the remaining 99%. And when huge protests were had about the unfair policies that benefit the 1% in America, collectively, the American media made the protesters look like naive children or just straight up demonized them. Look at these people asking for unrealistic things. Aren't they wrong for thinking the world can change? And if it can, they are going about it in the wrong way. Protesting is wrong. What do they want? Handouts? It's a generational issue. Look how much trouble they're causing the people who just do what they're told, like you. If they want a better life, they should work harder, like the rest of us, not protest. Only 65% of people have access to internet. Several US-based companies are working to improve that stat. Part of the problem is that in many underdeveloped countries, either theft or war terrorism cause equipment on cell towers to disappear. At least 3 companies are launching satellites that will provide cell and internet from space. Used smartphones can be bought in rural Africa for as little as a few dollars USD. This will give many millions internet access. If you have friends and smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, you'll live longer than a non-smoker who has no friends. No smoking plus friends equals immortality. Half of all children living in single-parent families live in poverty. According to the RAIN, only about 5% of the estimated number of sexual assaults will actually lead to an arrest. And only about half of those lead to incarceration of the suspect. So that's like 2.5% of sexual assaults being punished with jail time. Edit, I fixed a miswording I did. Don't know where the statistic came from, but I was watching 24 Hour in police custody the other day. They claimed that only around 1% of cases lead to jail time. Said there are tons of cases in which they know the perpetrator is guilty but they just don't have enough evidence to take them to court. 80% more likely doesn't mean 80% chance. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in men under 50. Men's suicide rates are higher while women's suicide attempts are higher. The second leading cause of death in US children between the ages of 10 and 14 years old is suicide. Contrary to popular belief, the chances of being killed by a T-Rex in the wild are exactly zero. They're pretty much harmless. Actually, I saw a documentary in 1993 showing that scientists had managed to recreate some dinosaurs, including the T-Rex, by cloning technology. They had planned to make a theme park with them, but unfortunately the dinosaurs escaped their enclosures and trashed the place. I think the documentary was called Billy and the Clonosaurus. The USA incarcerates more of its own citizens both per capita and for total amounts. They jail over 400k more citizens than China, which has 4.5x the population and has zero freedom of speech and a pretty punishing government. For-profit prisons is legalized slavery. It's actually worse than you think because large majority percent of prison population tends to be male, so on a VG basis us imprisons about 1.4% of male population, that is 1/70 guys is behind bars. That is unimaginably high. I doubt at any point in history of world anybody would have imprisoned close to that ratio.